What's up, Inspired Vision students, plus anybody I might be catching on YouTube? This is day 16 of 19. Yes, you heard that right, 19. We have an extra day of our summer school session, which is our Accelerated Algebra I course designed to prepare us for STAAR. And with that extra day, we're going to spend breaking up the 2015 STAAR Algebra I release test. There is 54 questions on this test, so in order for me to break it up into about 4 days, we're covering 15 questions today. Now those 15 questions are going to be scattered between all of the reporting categories. 11 questions come from reporting category 1, 12 from 2, 14 from 3, 11 from 4, and 6 from 5. And we're doing 15 of those questions. I'm going to refer back to the last 15 days of our lessons. That way, if you need a little bit extra review, because I can only spend about 2 minutes per question on the video. Now, you can get the exact release test from TEA's website if you Google 2015 release test, STAAR Algebra I release test. Then you can print it out and you can work these out. Because what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to show you the problem on the screen, and I'm going to want you to pause the video anytime I've given you enough hints where you can work out these questions on your own. Or maybe you don't need any hints at all. So if you want to pause and read over the question at first, I'm going to show this screen. That way it gives you a chance to read. And then I'm going to start giving you hints. And if you think you can handle the question on your own, pause the video again before I answer the question. Because, again, I can only spend about 2 minutes per question, so this video doesn't go too long. So, the first question comes from day 7. Here is our first hint. Our first hint is they are not asking for an equation from this. We could write each one of these coordinates out and try to get an equation of this line or try to make a prediction, but none of these answer choices are asking us to make a prediction. So that means we just have to look at each answer choice, see what they're talking about, and roll each one out one at a time. So here's your next hint. A is talking about a nonlinear correlation. Now that's a tricky word. Nonlinear means that it's either quadratic or exponential, because there's only 3 functions that we have to worry about in Algebra 1. It's linear, quadratic, or exponential. Now if these dots are making a parabola, or these dots are going up exponentially or going down as an exponential decay, then we could pick this answer choice. Here's another hint on B. On B it says if the temperature is above 100. Well, 100 is not on our graph, but the temperature is on the x-axis. So if I put this purple dot here at the top, then we can answer this question, and would it be less than 150? You decide. Now if you need another hint, C is talking about no correlation. No correlation is talking about your correlation coefficient, which is R, which means your dots have to be kind of scattered horizontally and not going up as a positive slope or going down as a negative slope. And finally, answer choice D. They're talking about points that are between 75 degrees and 90 degrees. So I put these as green dots on the graph. Now it's saying, do you expect that the temperature would be more than 120? You pick. I'm about to show you the answer. The answer that makes the most sense is D, because for the most part, if I pick a point between 75 and 90, it would be 120. The only time that it may be not is maybe right at 76, but for the most part, and that's what it's saying, are you mostly expecting the temperature to be, or 120 visitors at the temperature between 75 and 90? Okay, here comes question 2. So pause, read it over. Here comes your first hint. Now this concept is kind of split between day 1 with translating and day 10 where we have to solve. Okay, now this question's kind of weird. We just got to work backwards. So the first thing we have to realize is our total. So our first hint is to start with 50 $50. Then if you look at your change, he could have received more than $10. So we have to figure out how much he could have bought for that number. So how much he could have bought for 40. Or how much he could have bought if he received less than $20 in change. Hopefully this is enough hints. Try to finish this answer. All right, here it comes. The answer. Now, if I divide $3.49 into 40, I get 11. But we're rounding because you get actually a little bit more than 10, so you have to round down. But the tricky one is this one. If you divide 349 into 30, you get 8.5. So you may be tempted to round down to 8, but it does say that he receives less than $20, so it's more like 19. So maybe we should put 31 here and not 30. So that would make sense for us to round up to 9. So our answer choice is F. All right, here comes question number 3. Pause if you know what you're doing. This concept was from day 13. And the key here is that this is your first hint that R of X means Y equals 0. So you're looking for, and this is the key here, is looking for when the function hits the x-axis. That's every time it hits the x-axis, that's when Y equals 0. Hopefully that's enough of hints. Here's another one. Both of these are solutions, but not both of them are on your answer choices. Okay, so the answer to number 3. The answer is C, because only 14 was there. -6 wasn't there, not listed. And just to let you know where they're pulling for some of these other answers from, -50 is our y-intercept in this problem. 4 would be where the minimum's coming from in this problem. And -60 would also be part of the minimum coordinate, because the minimum coordinate is for -60, which is also the vertex in this problem. Okay, but all those were extra. The only one we're wanting is when it's equal to 0. So that's talking about zeros in the problem, solutions in the problem. Okay, here comes number 4. Number 4, they're talking about how the function is related to this word problem, which is buying songs from a website. All right, pause the video, give it a read it over. We talked about this concept on day 7. Now, this equation's already solved for, so if you want, here's your first hint, we could put it into the y equals key, look at the graph, or look at the table. So if we put this in our y equals key, it's pretty easy to type in, it's already solved. If we look at the graph, we're only looking when it starts here at 0, because the y-intercept is where it starts. This is a big hint to solve the problem. If you need me to keep going with hints, here's another hint. If you're looking at the table, you're starting at 0, 6. That is the first thing you start off with. And realize what X means in the problem. Also realize how your cost is going up and what that means in the problem. And what it means for your cost to start off with. Alright, that is enough hints. Oh, here it is written out. But here's the answer. The answer to this question is G, and here's the reason why. F is talking about the y-intercept, and each song is 125, not 6, which is the y-intercept. And then G is talking about the y-intercept of the graph, which is 6, which means we haven't bought a CD yet, so that would have to be the initial cost. H is talking about the slope, that represents the total number of songs bought, but the total number of songs, let's say if we bought one song, that's $7.25, but if we only bought one song, it only increased by $1.25, not the total number. And then finally, J is talking about the slope of songs when visiting the website, but X is the number of songs, not the slope. Okay, here comes number 5. Number 5 looks really hard, but we actually talked about this in a way on day 15. Okay, now here comes your first hint, and hopefully this is all you need. They're asking for an equation, so we know what to do when we're asked for an equation. What key can we use to find equations on our calculator? That is a huge hint. Hopefully that's enough for you to pause. Oh, there you go. I didn't even give you any more. Alright, if you're still lost, hopefully this is going to make a whole lot of sense. When we're asked to find equations, we can use our stat key. And if you're wondering what to type into stat, each one of these figures is our x values, so that'll go into L1. And each one of these total number of circles is our y numbers, and that'll go into L2. Now, an easy way to figure out how many circles are here is this is almost a 2 by 2, which 2 times 2 is 4, but it's missing 1, so 4 minus 1 is 3. This is 3 by 3, 3 times 3 is 9, minus 1 is 8, and that's the pattern for each one of these. So it's an easy way to get the total. Now, even when you get the total, you still want to turn your diagnostic on because we got to figure out the equation. And if you go stat count 4 for linear, which is what you should do always to start, we don't have 1 or negative 1 as our R, so we're going to try quadratic. If we had 1 or negative 1, we would stop. So in quadratic, which is stat count 5, we see 1 for our for our correlation coefficient. So that means quadratic is the equation, which is this. And we can match 1x squared plus 2x plus 0 to answer choice A. So it's pretty easy once you can put it into stat. Okay, here comes number 6. We talked about number 6 on day 10 when we were talking about systems. Okay, here's some hints. First off, there's 2 variables in the problem. It's walking shoes and running shoes, so you can label that as X and Y. Next hint, 135 is the total from the first sentence. 1.5 times as many walking shoes as running shoes is the equation for the second sentence. And another hint, if you have 1.5 times something else, then what you're multiplying by 1.5 or 1.5 as many, that keyword as many pairs, that means X is the bigger number. So you would put X on one side of the equation, 1.5 on the other side of the equation. So if you need another hint, here's your 2 equations. Now, I think that's all I'm going to give you. Oh, I'm going to tell you to solve each for Y. Okay? Here comes the answer. Alright, now, if you solve each for Y, and this is why we spent so much time learning to solve for Y, is you would subtract 1x for your first equation, and your first equation should be 135 minus 1x. Your second equation, you would need to divide by 1.5. Now, here's a tip. You could type into your calculator x divided by 1.5, or realize that there's 1 in front of x, and 1 divided by 1.5 comes out to be 2/3. So you would type in 2/3 x into your y equals key. Because once you have both equations, you type them into your y equals key, and then you look at your graph. Now, if we saw both graphs here, just like what we talked about on day 6 and day 7, if we saw both graphs here, we could use the Calc 5 enter. But since we only see one graph, we have to use our table and see when they match. Now you can go to each one of these numbers, start with 45, and then see if you see 90 twice, but you don't. You see 90 and 30. And then go to 54 and see if you see 81 twice, but you don't. It's only at 81 where you see 54 on both Y1 and Y2. So we know that J is our answer. Okay, number 7. Now, number 7, we talked about this concept on day 15. All right, here's your first hint, and pretty much the only hint I'm going to give you. First off, it's talking about a quadratic function. Function means we need an equation. So if we want an equation, we need to type something into stat. So how are we going to type this into stat? That's your first hint. Okay, if you're not able to type it in stat, here's how you do it. Since -2 is pointed to -3, that is one coordinate. Since -1 is pointed to -3.75, that is your second coordinate. Since 0 is pointed to -4, and then 2 is pointed to -3. This is what you should type into stat. Okay, I don't think I help anymore. No, I don't. All right, so hopefully you can take this question from here. All right, so here comes the answer. Now, if you type it into linear, try linear first, you're going to get R as 1.11 because you should still have diagnostic turned on. So then we're going to try quadratic, and we see R squared as 1. So we know it's quadratic. We can stop right there. So since it's quadratic, we can now put 0.25 as A with x squared. Then, since b is 0, we don't need to write plus 0x, but you could still get the answer even if you did. And then plus -4 means we write it as -4. Now, our next step is, once we have an equation, is to type it into our y equals key like this. And if you type it in a y equals key and look at the table, we see that A doesn't match up. We see that B doesn't match up. If we look at the graph, we see, C doesn't match up. If we look at the graph, B doesn't match up. But our equation that we first found from stat does match up, so D is the answer. All right, here comes number 8. Now, number 8 is pretty tricky. The concept is on day 5, although we did not cover a problem exactly like this. So I'm going to give you lots of hints to help you with this. All right, first hint. Since they're talking about slope of a line, that means it's a linear line. We have to think y equals mx plus b because that's our default equation for linear. Then we have to pull out what we are given. First off, they said the slope is 1/8. That means we're going to put 1/8 for our number by x. Then we can use one of these points and plug it in for x and plug it in for y. Here's what I mean by that. We are going to put 4 in for y, 1/8 for our slope, and multiply by -10. But we don't have b yet. We have to finish getting b before we can attempt to even figure out what the second number is, which is basically just y when you have -6 as your x. So if you finish solving for b, then b would be a 1 in front of b, and then you would multiply 1/8 times -10 to be -1.25. So that would be your triangle. So you would add 1.25 to both sides of the equation, which would be your b. Then you now have an equation. Now that you have an equation, you can finish this answer and tell me what y is. And that's as far as I'm going with your hints. Hopefully you can take it from here. Okay, here's the answer. So if you have an equation, you could do two things. You can type it into y equals, and look at the table when you see -6 and you see 4.5, or you can take this equation and plug in -6 in for x, which you get 4.5 as well, and turn that into a fraction, which is 9/2. So our answer is H. All right, number 9. Number 9 should be pretty easy. We talked about this concept on day 7. Okay, first hint. They're asking us to make a prediction, so we need an equation. I think, okay. Your other hint is 2015 is really 15 when we are looking at our numbers, because it started at 0 for 2000. That is the only hints I'm giving you for this question. Okay, here comes the answer for number 9. Now, first, to get our equation, we're going to type both of these points into stat. Then we're going to do stat calc 4. I know even if I have diagnostic on, you'll see 1. If you don't have diagnostic on, you know that it's linear because this is a straight line. So we know we could stop at linear anyways. All right, next. If you do stat calc 4, you write down this equation and you put it into stat. So you're going to put 5.7x plus 193 into your y equals key. Then we're going to look at 15 because 15 represents 2015. And that is our answer because it's in the thousands. So B is our answer. Okay, number 10. Number 10, we have not exactly had a question like this, but I'm going to give you a hint, and then it won't be too hard. And this is coming from concepts from day 5 and day 6. Okay, first hint. We have everything, both of these numbers divided by 1.5. So it's like 40 is divided by 0.5 and -2.5 is divided by 0.5. So go ahead and divide 40 by 0.5 and tell me what that number is, and -2.5 by 0.5 and tell me what that number is, and rewrite your equation without it being in fraction form. Okay, here comes your next hint. Since 40 divided by 0.5 is 80, -2.5 r is divided by 0.5 is -5r. The next really big hint, and this is kind of tricky, is 20 is the number of curbs. Curbs is where y is usually. So we are not solving for y in this case. In this case, we're solving for r. And that is the trick to this question. All right, here's what I mean by that. So we can either put this equation into our y equals key, just put x instead of r, and make sure you're looking at 20 for your curbs, or put 20 in for this c number and then solve for r. Either way will work. Either way will get your answer. And that's as far as I go on this question for hints. Okay, here we go. To finish this question, if we were to solve for r by putting 20 in for c, you would subtract 80 on both sides. 20 minus 80 is -60, and then you would divide by -5. Well, -60 divided by -5 is 12. Or if you were to use your y equals key, you would make sure you're not looking when x is 12. You're looking for when y is, not when x is 20, when y is 20, and then you see 12 as your answer. That's the tricky part of this question. All right, number 11. Number 11, it should be super easy. Hopefully I don't need any hints at all. We got this concept from day 7. If you do need a hint, the hint is to put this equation into y equals. All right, here comes the answer. If I put it in y equals, and I scroll down to match each one of these answer choices. To start off matching A, I would need to scroll down to 50. Now, so here's what it looks like in y equals. I don't need to worry about this because all of these are bigger than 5 anyways. So only C matches up all of these points. All right, here comes number 12. This concept is coming from day 12 when we talked about laws of exponents. Okay, now it looks hard, but it's really not. The key here is the volume. Volume is length times width times height. Hopefully that is the only hint you need on this question. Okay, if you need a second hint, then make sure you write this out side by side. So length is x squared y times width is x to the 1 power. I'll put that little 1 for a reason so you remember what to do. And then times y squared, which is the height. Okay, that is the only hints I give on this question. Oh, I did give you this. When on day 12, we talked about adding exponents when we multiply them together. Okay, here comes the answer. So if I add my exponents just for the x's when I multiply these three things together, then I'm adding 2 plus 1, and it becomes x to the 3rd power. And then when I add 1 plus 2 for my y's, it becomes y to the 3rd power, all as one term. So since they're talking about volume, multiply them together, you add your exponents, your answer is j. Okay, number 13. Number 13 is easy and hard all at the same time. It's hard because there's a lot of steps we need to do. But hopefully you're trained and you know exactly how to approach this question. We did these concepts on day 5 and day 6. Okay, first hint. First hint is we need the equation of line T. Line T is what's shown on the picture. Okay, if you need another hint or you can't really tell, you need to find 2 points off of this graph because they didn't give it to us and use 0, 2, that is this first point, and 5, 0, that is the second point. Okay, next hint. We should know, since define the equation, to type these in a stat and do stat count 4. And this is our equation of line T. Now maybe that wasn't the hard part of the problem. Maybe the hard part of the problem was the word steeper. That can be tricky. Steeper means the line has to be more vertical looking than this line. So it has to be more up and down. It has to drop at a steeper slope. That's where they're getting the word steeper. So it can't be flatter. That's another way to say it. And the y-intercept has to be below 0, 2. So it can't be above 0, 2. So there's 2 ways to approach this problem. And I think I'm done with the hints. Yes, I am. There's 2 ways to approach this problem. I'm going to explain it on the next screen. But hopefully you can get it. Okay, so one way we could approach this problem is we could start by putting negative 0.4x plus 2 into our y equals key and then try each answer choice one at a time in y equals. Here's what A looks like. So A, if you notice, this is my first line, and then my second line goes like this. This is steeper because it drops at a faster rate and it hits below 2. B actually hits above our line. C is definitely steeper, so that's the trick question on this one because it's obviously steeper, where A is maybe not as obvious as that is steeper, but it hits above our y-intercept. That's the reason why C is out. And then D, that hits below the line, but it's not as steep. It's flatter, so that's the opposite what we're looking for. It's not as steep. So A is our answer. Okay, number 14. Number 14 is one of these questions where it doesn't really fit into one of our days. The math in this problem is actually not that hard. It just looks hard because we have to do a bunch of steps. Okay, so here is your first hint for number 14. We want to work backwards with this problem because the most information we got is actually in this sentence right here. The senior employee earns $14 an hour. So if we start with the senior employee, knowing that he earns $14 an hour, then, and also knowing he works 16 hours a day, that is the first thing we can actually figure out. Now, once we figure that out, then we can figure out the junior's employee because the senior employee makes $39.50 more than this, senior employee makes $39.50 more than the junior employee. And then we can figure out we know how many hours he works, so we would have his total, and then we can figure out his hourly pay. So it's not a super hard question, but there is about 4 different steps we have to do to get the answer. Okay, here comes the answer. So the senior employee, we're supposed to do 14 times 16, which is $224. Then we're going to subtract $39.50 to get $184.50. This is the total for the junior employee. Then we know that he works 18 hours, so we would divide by 18 to get the hourly rate of $10.25. Okay, here comes our last question for today. In this last question, we talked, again, this is split between talking about functions that we mentioned on day 2, and we're going to have to find an equation, which is we learned about how to do that on day 7. Okay, so first hint. Function we get from our stat key. So we have to know what to type into our stat key. And that is to take each one of these 3 different workouts and break it up to be calories for our X and minutes for our Y. Once we do that, we have an equation as Y equals 0.1x. Now the next tricky thing about this problem is none of our answer choices actually have any numbers. They're just asking us to figure out what this means. What does this mean as a function? So they're talking about dependent and independent quantities. Now X is always independent, always. Y is always dependent. So then we got to think back to the question of what does X mean and what does Y mean in the problem. As far as my hints go, but I'm going to explain it on the next screen. Okay, so X in this problem is minutes and Y is calories. So the number of calories burned is the independent quantity. Sorry, I was reading double check. I think I have this flipped, but it still works. I do have this flipped in the X and Y, but it still works. Okay, so the number of calories burned in 30 minutes, I should have actually flipped this to be 30, 35, 20, 300, 350, 20. The only thing that's going to change is this will be 10x instead of 0.1x. I apologize. I'm at the end of the video, so I can't fix this. But everything else holds true that I wrote on the screen. The number of minutes the runner worked out is the independent quantity, not the dependent quantity. The number of workouts is already given in the problem. It's 3. And finally, D is not the answer choice because the problem is not talking about steps. Okay. Thank you for watching these videos. I'm going to break down the rest of the 2015 STAAR tests on my other days. So stay tuned.